All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 58 today, Philosophy and the Dunning-Kruger Effect. Check us out at Patreon, patreon.com/Mike and Maurice. And our website is mikeandmauricemindescape.com. Also, you can check out our guest, Andrew Tischler, on Instagram at Andrew Tischler Glass. Without further ado, what's up? What's up, Andrew? How you doing?
Not too much. Thanks for having me on. How's it going?
Good. So you wanted to talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect. So let's jump into that first. So why don't you explain what the deal is with the Dunning-Kruger, why it's significant, and why you've been, researching it like of late or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. So it's something I heard of. Actually, John Cleese, the comedian, I think I sent you the clip, Mike. He's got a really funny take on the Dunning-Kruger effect, but it's something that I learned about, a couple years ago. And then just recently that pattern has just seemed to be popping up more and more to me as like something important just to recognize. So just real quick, the Dunning-Kruger effect, it's, if you ask someone randomly how good they think they'll be at something, let's say like a certain skill, like maybe you're watching a professional sport on the television or something, you say, well, I wonder if I got to try that, how good would I be? People tend to rate themselves as understanding it a lot more than they actually do, and that they would be a lot better at it than they actually are. And so the reason is they're just not as aware of all the subtleties and the nuances involved in the fields. So basically, what's my point? Yeah, so it's it's a blind spot basically. You're just not aware that you don't know certain aspects of a topic.
Now, how is it different than, let's say, somebody that's like overly is it just like a cockiness? Like that's what I mean. I was trying to figure it out myself. Is it like sure. a light form of I don't even know, maybe
illusions of grandeur?
Yeah, no, I mean,
yeah,
but almost like borderline mental personality, like not a psychopath, but something, an egomaniac, maybe something along those lines, where it's like this guy's got a huge ego, it's inflated, and it does that play into it, or what do you think it is?
I think not so much, only because the idea is that we all tend to fall victim to this kind of bias. So it's something that's just sort of easy to go through. I'm not exactly, we'll talk about the exact cause. I don't know if it's egoism exactly, or I think it's just kind of it's a sort of naivete. You just haven't thought about the thing before.
So if I was watching a movie and I saw an actor and I was like, oh, I could do that.
Exactly.
I can do that better. That's pretty
much it's that subtle sense of I bet you I could do it better. So I think it's
Maurice does do that, by the way. Let me just point that out. Maurice is constantly telling me how shitty movies are. I could make a better one.
I never said I could.
I'm just pointing that out there. Okay.
Right.
Well, that's what's so funny about it. So it's something that we all experience. So I think it's pretty typical, and that's again, it's another reason why I say it's literally a pattern I see everywhere. So it's just this idea that like. Basically, the way I think about it is, like I mentioned, it's a blind spot. So you just don't know what you don't know. So, okay, so here's the John Cleese's funny take on it. It's the same set of information that would make you good at the thing is the set of information that lets you know whether or not you're good at that thing. So it's a little bit confusing. Yeah. But it's
just the space in your brain, right? Like, okay, so the energy that I spent on not knowing it and knowing something else took away from me knowing that thing, is basically what you're saying.
No, basically the information that you need to tell yourself whether or not you're good at that thing is the same information that it takes to be good at that thing in the first place.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So for instance, let's just say you went to school and you studied philosophy. I went to school and I studied physics. Okay. If I pretended to know about philosophy, it's because I put all my energy into physics. And I mean, I know that there's people that are just dumber, that just don't care, period, about any of that kind of stuff. But right. I'm just saying, in terms of, don't you think that has to do with putting all your energy into something else, and therefore you want to have an opinion on something, but you don't necessarily know what you're talking about, from that kind of a standpoint.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean that yeah, I could see that, but I guess it's just I don't know. I guess it's just describing a peculiar situation where you don't have the thing that the thing that you need is the thing that you're also missing, and so it's for whatever reason you're just not aware that you don't have the relevant information. I don't know. Yeah.
But do you though? Because sometimes I think, and I thought about this too. We've all done what you're talking about, this Dunning-Kruger, where you're like, oh, I could do that, or at least you've thought it in your mind. I'm sure most people have at some point. Um, but I think to myself, like, I know when I say it that it sounds wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know when I'm saying it sometimes where I'm like, no, there's no fucking way. You
Right.
know.
Well, so that right there is the kind of the solution that I want to end up bringing up is the solution to the potential problem of the Dunning-Kruger effect. But let's take it another direction. So the way that I saw it popping up in philosophy is like, let's talk about, like, again, I like to talk about the word worldview. So like, what worldview do you walk around with every day? Okay. So what I'm thinking of is you and I and Kevin, we all have, like, we're Americans. We were raised at a similar time in the same country under the same education system. So we all basically share a really, really similar worldview. But the funny thing about that worldview is most of it is not something that you and I like directly put our hands on and understood. We know the sun's up there. We know that there's space rockets, there's cars, there's technology, there's all this energy stuff, like all of this stuff is going on in the world. We don't understand mostly any of it, but we witness it every day. And so the Dunning-Kruger effect is that kind of thing where you say, like, well, to me it's this idea that you're not completely blown away by every single little thing in the world all the time, right? And it would be unreasonable in a certain way to be completely blown away all the time. But the reason you're not is kind of like, to me, the Dunning-Kruger effect is that you'll see what is essentially a miracle, like a car drives by. But because you don't know, because you can't tell and explain to yourself how much of a miracle that car is, you sort of can take it for granted. You say, yeah, you have the word car and you know that it moves you around, but we don't know how it works. And so that space between knowing exactly how it works, but knowing what it is, like, all of that information is invisible to us when we see the car. We don't even know we don't know. We just kind of take it for granted. And that sort of taking it for granted is, to me, is a bit of the Dunning-Kruger effect on like a larger scale. It's something that we do literally all the time, taking something for granted. So if you look at a thing but don't completely comprehend it, there's an element of the Dunning-Kruger effect sort of going on. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So, and you don't know, so you don't have a moment to question it. That's really the thing, is you're missing like these signals that like let you know that there's something you're not grasping. And so that's why it's easy for all of it. It happens to all of us all the time. It's actually, like I said, it's kind of a chronic thing that we're all faced with, is we're constantly like not bowled over with amazement by things.
Do you think that's a construct of America, or?
The way I would kind of like one way you could think about it is it's like an evolutionary thing. If you were that monkey that was like constantly looking at every flower and every beautiful raindrop and bug and beetle, like maybe it's not, evolutionary helpful to be constantly questioning yourself, right? Like if you're trying to survive, you don't have any room or need to question those other aspects of reality. It's only when we live in a time when we aren't constantly fighting for survival. But it's the same thing. So I think this gets back to it, though, is if you're a kind of person has a generally fearful mindset or perhaps worldview, and you're constantly looking to make sure that you're safe. And this is like, again, we all do this kind of stuff. You might react to someone that makes you uncomfortable. So, you prefer to feel like you understand the situation rather than be in doubt. So there's benefits to accepting this effect. It makes you feel like you've grasped the thing. But really, we don't understand most of anything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how does that differ from, let's say somebody read a book, like one book, somebody, on biology, and they thought that they knew everything about evolution from that book. Is that similar, or is that a kind of a different thing?
Well, it's kind of funny because the exposure to the information, or let's take you're saying a particular field like biology. As soon as you get exposed to that information, it's supposed to make you realize how little you know. But I can see what you're saying, where sometimes that doesn't always happen. So I guess it depends on the motivation of that person. Again, that person that wants to be able to say, I know this, I know that, the reason they want to do that is because at the end of the reasoning is they're fearful of something. They want to come off in a sort of dominating way, like they understand the thing. And so it benefits them not to understand it. They can say they understand it. And so that's literally an example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. I understand this thing, but you don't. So that's kind of like, I think that is a window into the psychology of why people are constantly embracing this Dunning-Kruger effect, is it makes them feel like they're in control.
Could this go back to like some sort of evolutionary thing about how we were all competing and it's better to act like you know something than actually know that thing if you don't know it, you know, kind of
that sort of power, politics. Yeah, I think so. And that's why
you even see that with like mystics, and like there's obviously people that have some sort of real thing going on, but then most of the people are charlatans that pretend, or they'll be like mentalists or illusionists or something along those lines.
Exactly. And again, anyone that wants to take advantage of that, you just can tell that the root of all of their behavior is fear. And it's not always a good idea to follow someone who's preaching this doctrine of fear. But I agree. So anyone that wants to say, hey, believe me, listen to me, I've got answers, they're peddling fear. That's actually what they're peddling, is fear. So it's a really fine line. Like Robert Anton Wilson is someone that I sort of grew up academically listening to, and he would always say, don't believe me, go find out for yourself. And that, when someone starts saying that all the time, that's a person to listen to, is go find out for yourself. Don't believe me, listen to me because I'm trying to help you, but don't believe me, go find out for yourself, do that extra work. And that go find out for yourself is what is the overcoming of supposedly the Dunning-Kruger effect. You can't just say I understand.
So now, is this just something that's do they talk about this from like a clinical standpoint too? Like, is this something that can actually hinder somebody's personality, or?
Well, I mean, we've all had jobs and worked for people before, and it's a pretty hard thing to work for a boss that doesn't know that they don't know how to do the job. And so I think it's a pattern that, again, when you start to recognize the pattern, you start to see it literally everywhere, playing out all the time. So again, that's a great question. I haven't done that psychological clinical research on the topic. I'm kind of just sort of seeing it more in philosophy. So I can't quite answer that question as far as like hardcore research. I'm sure that there is, though, because there are psychologists that came up with the thing. So I'm sure they've done a lot of,
Sure.
Yeah, I'm sure there's different levels of it in each person too. So
exactly. But so again, like the way that it relates again to philosophy, philosophy is the study of all knowledge, right? Like, what can we know is one of the questions of philosophy. But if you have this Dunning-Kruger effect happening, you don't realize what you don't know. It's the blind spot about what you don't know. And so it's like kind of, the Dunning-Kruger effect is like the antithesis of philosophy, right? It's the opposite of it. And so philosophy is perhaps, to me, the solution to the Dunning-Kruger effect, and in a particular solution, particularly to me, like the big thing the thing that you need to, so once you learn that the Dunning-Kruger effect is a thing that exists, that's your only antidote for your own, Dunning-Kruger effect isms. If you know that it exists, you have at least the opportunity to say, maybe I'm wrong about this thing. And in that mindset of maybe I'm wrong, that skepticism, that is the birthplace of knowledge. That's where you're going to start to learn something. The maybe I'm wrong. The wise man says I know nothing. The more I know, the more I know not. That kind of thing. And again,
do you think it plays into, though, like, so that sometimes we're just bored, or we believe, like, we see something and it's just not, like you said, or I think you might have said it a few minutes ago, something's just not impressive anymore. Like something's not as, wow, look at that. So like, here's an example. I just watched that movie Free Solo the other night. If anybody that hasn't seen that, that's a fucking amazing movie. Okay.
Sure. All right, I'll rent it tonight. You sold me.
It's free on National Geographic, I think. I don't know if you can find it on the internet. But so watching that movie, I was throughout the whole thing, I was like, there is no way, even if I lost 100 pounds and started rock climbing every day, there's no way I could do that. There's just no way. What I saw was nuts. This guy climbed the high, the hardest climb in America or whatever without any ropes.
I don't even
It's
like hearing about it.
nuts. Oh, it's
Terrifying.
nuts.
Yeah.
So just from that alone, it's like, okay, so that level is like amazing to the point. So if somebody is sitting there saying, I can do that, I think that person has a problem.
Right. And again, well, so what's their motivation? Why do they feel they need to compete in that way? And again, like, from what I've read, that's just a signifier that they're fearful in a certain way. They feel threatened by this thing and they need to overcome it. And so it's like, and again, so the Dunning-Kruger effect helps them accomplish that. They say, well, and again, it's that thing. If you imagine yourself up on the cliffside, if you've never been there, you don't know all of those difficult challenges of what it means to be hanging on by your fingertips. Like, I've climbed a rock wall before. It's really hard. You don't know, that muscle in your arm's going to get strained. Like, you don't know that stuff. None of that is coming up and springing into your imagination and saying, hey, this is a problem. It's not there. So it can't spring up and say, I don't know. So it's you're just laying in your ignorance, and it's a pretty funny thing. And again, like we all do it all the time. So it's just one of these things that's really good to be aware of, this pattern that your brain goes through. It's a coping mechanism, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what I used to do is I used to externalize that when I was younger, like in my 20s, just kind of this brash, oh, I could, whatever, I'll figure that out. Right?
And especially, the younger you are, because you have less life experience. And so,
well, but here's the other weird thing. I will say this. So when I was learning to play guitar and I would see people and be like, oh, I could do that. So it would push me to go try and do that thing. And in the process of doing that thing, I would actually get better at it. Now, did I get to the level that I thought I could do? Sometimes, but most of the time it was just pushing me in that direction.
Absolutely. Well, so then there's a chart or a curve.
Yeah, I have it right now. It's hilarious you said that.
Yeah. So if someone asks you, how good do you think you'll be at playing the solo in, Freebird or whatever, you're trying to learn. I've tried to learn to play guitar as well. The first time you ask yourself that, you'll say, well, I'll probably pick it up. I'm probably 7 or 8.
I mean, I was looking at You Enjoy Myself by Fish, which is a little bit sturdier than Freebird. Exactly. But yeah, I mean, I was shooting for the stars, basically.
Yeah, but the chart though is as soon as you try it for the first time, that's when your confidence drops completely. And then you spend the rest of your time working on it, slowly creeping back up until eventually you become as confident as you were the very first moment you thought about it.
Right.
And so it's this funny curve where you start at the top, you drop down completely, and then when you become a master again at the end of your life, that's when you're as confident as you were in that first moment. So it's this kind of funny circle.
I was gonna say this little graph actually shows that when you become a master, you're actually a little bit below that cockiness.
Yeah, you don't even blast, so. You'd be lucky to be as cocky, as good as you thought you would be at a thing, right? Exactly. Yeah. So that's the shape of it.
But nice. What? Yeah. Here, I'll try and
if you can get it
pull it up on the main screen. Hold on.
Yeah, it's that chart's pretty. I think everyone's went through that, and we were making jokes about me making movies and ragging on movies, but the exact thing happened to me. I go, this is easy. You try and make it, you go, wow. You got to set up every little nuance, and it's just, and then boom, you shoot right to the bottom. Valley of Despair.
Exactly.
There you go.
That's a good one, Michael.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at it, I mean, it does make sense, though. It's not like it's just some fringe thing that, it's not like astrology or something like that,
No. Yeah. I mean,
although I do have something to say about that. I do have something to say about that as well. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But, I think this stuff's interesting because I think humans do kind of have these like template or... I mean, we're all different. Let's face it. We all have little quirks, different things, whatever. But I do think there are certain sets, if that makes sense, like different categories of mindsets that may be different in certain ways, but have like a general base of kind of what people are about, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Personality types or however you want to phrase it. Yeah.
Yeah. That other personality types. I don't necessarily agree with the kind where you see people posting like I'm blah blah on Twitter, like I'm whatever those even mean. I don't even know what any of that stuff means. But in terms of I don't think those ones. But when I look at like stuff having to do with just like like I said, kind of like astrological stuff. Obviously, I believe more in astronomy and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of, it's interesting to look at sometimes and be like, I am like that. And I know other people that personally that you couldn't say the same things about, so.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I could go on and on about astrology. My views have evolved, pretty drastically in the last couple of years. But maybe that's a good, do a little bit of research and talk about that. I don't know too much about it, unfortunately, but I mean, yeah, there's a lot to be said about it.
And it's a very woo-woo thing, immediately if you talk about people like, oh, but it's just like, when the people that do look at it, they're like, oh, that, even if you read like, the reason why I'm saying it's a little different is if it's not like reading a fortune cookie thing where you crack this thing
Right.
open and you can just apply it to anything. I do think that are certain characteristic traits when you read like a horoscope, like a real one done by somebody that knows what they're doing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well, you have to understand that, and people probably don't understand this a lot of the time, but the astrology comes from a different worldview than the one that you and I are taught to hold.
Yeah, it's a
astrology,
more ancient one.
well, yeah, it doesn't make any sense in the modern worldview context.
It's like alchemy to chemistry. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, but I mean, this gets on another thing I've just recently been thinking about, but it definitely, again, has to do with the Dunning-Kruger effect and philosophy and all that. But yeah, so let's just throw this out there real quick because we're talking about it. But we're all aware of Copernicus, right? So Copernicus was the one that challenged the idea that the Earth was in the center of the universe.
Yeah.
Right? The heliocentric model.
Yep.
So we're all pretty familiar with that episode in science where he proved mathematically that this made more sense, and it took a certain amount of time for people to accept the fact that the Earth was not at the center, the sun was at the center.
Right.
So there was this revolution in how we viewed the world, and something that if you look into the history of how that actually happened, it was a lot bigger than just an astronomical fact. People that believed in the pre-Copernican worldview believed that the Earth was the center of the entire universe and that it stood still and everything turned around the Earth, and that there was the vault of the heavens, and it was still a very Christianized worldview, and it was very, again, like astrological, magical. It was a radically different worldview. So the Copernican one that we all have now, I just want to talk about the fact that was a revolution in science, and that it took time for every single person on the Earth to go from the geocentric to the heliocentric, right?
Well, it wasn't proven until Galileo could even look out and say, hey, that is right,
So, but the reason I bring that up is that we are actually in a very similar position right now in history, but the revolution that's occurring was kicked off with the quantum mechanics. So quantum mechanics radically challenges, and in fact it broke the worldview that we held before about how we thought that little particles worked, right? It completely broke that. But what's interesting is that there hasn't been a person that's really established the next theory yet, and this is over 100 years now. So
we were talking about that with Brian Keating, this guy that was up for a Nobel Prize, and wrote a book about it. But he admits, like, there's so many scientists with so many different competing views, and it's so political. So even when you think you have something good, and it is because it's scientific method and you have to recreate it and prove it and different stuff, that there's still a bigger picture that we just don't understand. Even if we were to keep chipping away, we might not ever get to the point where we're at the core of this thing.
Well, I won't agree with that exactly, because for me, what it shows us is that we need a totally different model. We need a totally different worldview. And so there are, like you said, string theory, and there's all sorts of people that are trying to propose that. But as long as we stay within the worldview that we were given originally, it's impossible to solve those problems. But the whole thing about science is trying to solve as many of the problems with as few of the assumptions as possible. So it's just when you put the problem correctly, the answer is a lot more forthcoming. So it's possible that if we get the model right, a lot of these mysteries that seem impossible to solve now will be possible to solve. And so again, the reason I bring all that up is that it's just, first of all, it's nice to recognize that we're living in this time where our old assumptions need to be challenged, but there's nothing to replace them with. So we're living in this really exciting time. And again, but we're not really acknowledging that. We're more having this Dunning-Kruger effect that we think we know how the world works, and so we say, like, well, astrology is bullshit, but that's from the old worldview. So what would it look like in the new worldview is my whole point. And there's just we're just on this huge horizon where no one can really say for sure what is real and what's not anymore. You know, this, and I don't mean to be woo-woo about it. You have to be very scientific, but there's just a lot more possibilities now with a new model. The new model can just give us a lot more insights than the old one did. And I find it almost frustrating because very few people are acknowledging that we're in this really exciting time where like literally the nature of reality is being challenged.
Well, you've got you got all the new different science stuff coming out. You've got AI that's becoming huge. You've got psychedelics, which
Well, I don't even mean. I mean, I agree with you, but I just mean like physics and like how. Like,
oh yeah. But even that,
works.
I mean, look, I think we're falling back on our old ways too, because most of the scientists that are studying that are falling back on this multiverse theory now. So it's like they keep pushing to this other thing when they haven't even proven the other. Like the Big Bang still isn't even proven.
Well, that's right. So that it's just really, it's a really exciting time. And again, it shows that like, you know, it's just really worth it to try to challenge typical assumptions. And so like a worldview is this like Dunning-Kruger goggles that you put on, and it answers these things for you, and it doesn't leave room for questions any longer. You're like, oh well, I know how the world works, but the point is that those goggles are wrong. We know they're wrong.
That's scary too, because that's the way most people feel about science. Most people feel like they went to school for, you know, 12 grades or whatever longer for college, you know, if you're going for to become a scientist, or you're going for a lot longer, whatever. So
even then,
even then, but you've like, okay, so the difference between a scientist and somebody is out of college is that somebody just went to school for 5 to 10 years longer. Maybe.
Yeah. No, exactly. But they're still working with the same model, and
right. That's what I'm saying. And I'm not saying that that's not amazing and those people aren't on the frontier of all this stuff. I'm saying that they are still a human being with cognitive bias that is still pushing an agenda where we're supposed to just believe, when there's plenty of smart people that could just be doing the same thing. You know, like I think that was your post that you made on Facebook that I reached out to you. I mean, obviously we talk and stuff, but you posted something about continuous learning, even when when you're older, and continuing to find out things and have a curiosity for different topics. So I think that's where that comes into play, is like even scientists that think they know it all. Well, I mean, I'm sure they're doing research and looking at other people's stuff too.
But it's true. Yeah. Like our worldview is one where we try to, we think that it's enough to just get a primary education. And then we can say, well, now that I know how the world works, I'm going to plan my life accordingly. You know, but with all these assumptions built in, basically these authoritarian assumptions, it's essentially a way to be ruled over. You know, that someone tells you how to feel about you have one life to live. And someone tells you how to feel about it when you're a child. And now we live our entire life in this bubble that we know is wrong based on the scientific research, yet that we're not challenging ourselves to get out of. And so that to me is, again, the essence of what's kind of terrifying about it, is that, you know, I've got this one life, and they're telling me that I'm particles, I don't have free will, and I'm going to be dead when I die, and none of it matters. There's this whole, like, for me, this stuff is always just so loud in my head. But the point is that none of that is proven. None of that is proven. So we can open that back up to like ideas that really, you know, that feed our heart and soul and make us feel more whole.
There's something depressing about that, though, isn't there? Like about that worldview, the let's say Sam Harris.
Well, that's what I'm trying to.
Richard Dawkins worldview, where it's like, you know, there's something, and I'm not. Look, this is what I'll say, and I mean, we do some pretty fringe and woo-woo topics on this podcast, and I enjoy it because I like looking into the stuff, and some of it's BS, and there are things to some of the things, so it just depends on what it is. But I think there's something romantic about looking at that side of life, and it gives you like
hope.
Yeah, hope that there is, you know, it gives you a purpose. And I understand what the humanist, you know, perspective is, oh, I'm just, you know, this life is my God, and I'm going to do everything I can to be the best person I can while I'm here. And that's great too. That philosophy works too. But I think you see a lot of those people demonizing the people that want to have that romantic thought of life, you know?
Yeah, because I mean, and this is, you know, the basically like the end of the bottom bones of the conversation is that unless you are an absolute transcendent expert on a topic, you don't have the opportunity to state anything about it, right? And again, none of us are transcendent experts on anything, right? And so the
Right.
idea that we can live in a stagnant worldview that we're sure about is itself a falsity. Anytime that you say, well, I just know I feel this way about the thing, but you're missing an opportunity to like challenge that opinion. And so it just sort of points to this again. It's taking away the mundane and pointing towards the absolute miraculous about how miraculous life is, and that you could get out of bed and just be just stunned by the sunlight and by everything, like a psychedelic trip where it just reminds you that everything is just completely stunning, and we don't have to live in this boxed in worldview. And not only that it's more romantic, but it's more scientific to get out of that worldview. It doesn't have to be that we're just turning towards something that makes us feel better, although it does make us feel better. It's my whole thing too, is that it's way more scientific to start looking at more broader options than the one that we're given. So it's just like once you get a hold of this pattern, you start to again see it everywhere, and you see it pervades all the levels of your life, and you're like, wow, okay, so this is like a little grip hold where I can move and grow myself from by acknowledging what I don't know. It's such a powerful thing. So like I said, you see it everywhere. These patterns is everywhere.
Isn't that a Tesla quote too? It's like, once science realizes that by studying the metaphysical, they'll make more,
Progress.
leaps in progress in this amount of years, or it was something like along those lines.
I remember that. Didn't think of it, but yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly.
But doesn't that make sense too? Like, I think he was looking at things from like beyond the edge of things, and from there he was finding stuff that wasn't being found before. When most scientists look at things the way they work from the process from the ground up, as opposed from the
Well, right. So I'll give you my metaphor that I explain to myself when I think of exactly what you're saying. Is there's two types of scientists. Again, it's the simulation theory metaphor. So let's just go with this thing. You have let's say we are in a simulation. There's the type of scientist that studies the pixels that they see. They study what the simulation gives them, right? They study the reality that the simulation presents them, and they do the science on that. But then there's another type of scientist that actually gets outside of their own particular simulation and studies the code, and not just for their simulation, but for everything that is on that entire computer, right?
Right.
So if you're mistakenly, and this is what Maya means, the world is illusion. The world of our senses is an illusionary world. That's what that means, is if we're in a simulation, the thing that the simulation wants us to see is a physicalized version of the actual code, the actual reality of the thing. And so if you're stuck looking at the simulation, you're going to miss out on the whole code, all of the code for every other program and every other reality you know what I mean? So it's either you're studying the thing that it presents you or studying the actual thing itself.
Right.
So that's how I look at two scientists. You have a lot of scientists that are really good at studying the simulation, but they don't even know that there's anything outside of it. And that's what's so funny, is they can't explain any of their theories. None of their theories make any sense without that other science, the other science Tesla's talking about. So that's how I look at it. You can study the one simulation, or you can study the thing that makes every simulation possible, metaphysics. That's how I see it.
Yeah, that's a good path for sure.
Exactly. It's a really powerful metaphor for the new type of, again, this is the new worldview. The old worldview is we live in a single reality and it's all that exists. But the new worldview is that we live in a single reality amongst not the multiverse theory that you get told where every time you make a decision, there's a new Kevin, there's a new Mike, and you split, the one Mike did. Not that. I'm talking like way vaster than that. Like realities with different types of physics, realities with different types of beings, realities, if you read some of these people, Swedenborg and Robert Monroe from Tom Campbell, they go to different, not planets, they go to different realities and talk to different beings on different planes, and you know what I mean? So which world do you want to be in? Like, I could tell you which one I think is more compelling, and
I think Rudolf Steiner was dabbling in that stuff too.
Exactly. I mean, he goes and just, it's amazing. Swedenborg, Steiner, the thing with Steiner is he doesn't commit it to paper. He never tells you about those experiences. But like Swedenborg is one that gives you a couple glimpses behind the curtains at the experiences he had. So it's so frustrating that Steiner doesn't talk about it. And he's got this kind of personal code that he follows. There's a reason why you don't talk about it. The Buddha did the same thing. The Buddha never talked about his actual experiences. He only wrote about what would get people to those experiences.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And look, most of this stuff is just perception too. Like, I don't know what things look like. If somebody put me in your brain right now and I was your consciousness, it would probably be pretty jarring. Like
Yeah,
like
Pretty alien.
yeah.
right.
So I think that
Well, I will say real quick, because I like that you bring that up. Steiner, my very favorite book is The Philosophy of Freedom. I kind of get like all of the foundational knowledge. The reason I can talk about anything is that's where I learned a lot of like this new worldview I have. So it's a really great book, but he talks about that. If you were to say take like an alien or something like that, or a being with another type of body, but the thing he actually makes a really interesting point though, is that with percepts, with things that you see with your senses, that's one thing. But with concepts, it's actually a different ballgame, because you can't have a different concept of a triangle than an alien. If it's a three-sided figure, it's a triangle. It doesn't matter what species or what reality you're in. So the code is transcendent, but the percept, the simulation, is dependent on the body of the individual, on the world they're in. But there's an objective and a subjective side to everything. But the fact that the objective does exist and that we can get to it, we can all agree about what a triangle is. That gives us the potential to agree all of what like love is, for example, or these higher values that we think are abstract. They may actually turn out to be objective, that anyone can grasp them despite what their consciousness is like. So it's a really interesting point.
Yeah, I mean, love's pretty interesting in itself. It's
yeah, I like
nobody can really explain it. It's a feeling.
Well, no, see, you got to be careful though, because this is what philosophy of freedom is all about. Again, this is a very particular worldview that I've been developing for a long time. But for Steiner, I like to go through. I have this like sacred trinity, right? So it's existence, freedom, and love. Those are the three parts of this trinity. So the fact that you exist means that you're here to do a thing. If there was nothing for you to do, there wouldn't be any reason for you to exist, right? So there's got to be something going on for you to exist to do. Well, the doing is an action. So that means you have a sense of freedom. You are able to do something. You are free to do something. So the fact that you exist proves that you are free to do something. And then the thing about love is that if you want to commit a loving action, you can't be told to do that thing. You can't have a God tell you to love him, because that's not love anymore, right? That's that classic thing. You can't be compelled to love something, because then that's power. That's like you're
influenced. Yeah.
You're not free to love them. So you have to be free in order to commit a loving act, and you have. That's why people think the God in the Old Testament's the demiurge from Gnosticism, because you shall not love any other god but me, or you should not hold any, like
right.
He's got an inferiority complex. If you really created everything or whatever, you wouldn't.
Yeah, so that's an absurd thing. So a love cannot be compelled. So love has to be free, and a person has to exist to be free. So this is the sacred trinity, that love is the same thing as freedom, and it's the same thing as existence. Existence, in order to be free, a free act is always a loving act. And it's a little bit convoluted, and that's Steiner's that's what the philosophy of freedom is about, is that if you can transform your actions from something that's compulsive by nature to something that you choose to do for yourself through your own knowledge, then you can start making loving actions. So you may do something correct by nature, but according to Steiner, that wouldn't necessarily be a loving act, because you don't know why you're doing it. But if you know why you're doing it, then you're free to do it, because freedom and knowledge are the same thing for Steiner. So it's this whole thing. But so love for Steiner is it's a point of knowledge, and it's actually something that it's an action. Love is an action, not a feeling. Yeah. Sorry to go. That's the whole.
I think love is beyond that. To be honest with you, I think love isn't. I think love is something. It's not an emotion. It's not a. I said feeling, but that's the only way I can quantify it with words.
It's wisdom.
It's beyond. I mean, it's something that's metaphysical or transcended beyond just this meat body, or these meat bodies that we have.
Totally.
Like I think it's something that's, if consciousness, we find out that it's beyond just our own brains and extends out into whatever. I think
proven, but yeah,
right. But we'll find, I think we'll find some breadcrumbs on love there, probably.
Oh, absolutely. Like I think love is the transcendent nature of reality. Love is like the foundation of all of reality.
Well, yeah, that's the basis of what's his face, Tom Campbell's My Big Toe, is that everything, the entropy funnels down to love. So,
Exactly.
I mean, I can get, like I said, I like his books. I like his philosophy. I can get down with it. There's certain things I don't agree with that he says, and certain things, but it's like he said, there's going to be things that change or whatever. His thing's more of just like a platform to work off of,
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Yep.
Well, it's hard to agree with everything from one particular person. We're all individuals.
right.
We're not
Yep.
the same. So
And
how could you
exactly.
agree with every single thought from one person?
And it's again, it's that back to this whole, the message of this episode anyway, is that it's not even really important to agree or disagree in the moment. Everything is just information that you can work with and hold and move forward with and react with. But you should always be skeptical of everything you believe, and then skeptical of things you don't believe. You gotta be able to challenge on both sides. And
So
yeah.
that's interesting you say that, though. So back to the Dunning-Kruger, it works the opposite way too. Like you could have the most amazing experience, tell people about it, and they won't believe you, even though they could believe if it was in a story that could happen to them. When
Yeah.
you actually tell somebody that's the case, or hey, I just saw an alien, or they'd be like, no, you didn't. But if they saw a movie, you'd be like, oh, if I was going to see it, I'd do this, or whatever.
No, totally. And this is actually a second whole aspect to the Dunning-Kruger effect that as I was thinking about this episode and all that, I thought of, it's not just knowledge that's invisible to us. Like you're saying, it's also other people's experiences in life. So it's impossible to know what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. That's that classic thing. And you'll literally never have the opportunity to do that. But to think that you have the ability to override their experiences, that's that ultimate sin against knowledge and whatever. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect. To say like, well, I hear what this person is saying, but I just don't agree with them. Well, of course you don't, because you literally could never know why they're saying what they're saying. But that doesn't stop the validity of what they're saying. And so if you recognize your own inability to have those, to recognize those experiences, it makes you more, it's about empathy.
Right.
So it's, and I guess empathy is, it's you don't have to walk in their shoes. I think empathy is loving them despite having not walked in their shoes, right? Like I don't need to be there to know that I can accept what you're saying. So it is a very difficult thing, but yeah, the personal experiences are another. I mean, that's a fundamental thing that Dunning-Kruger effect.
Well, the reason why I bring that up too is, let's talk about Plato's cave for a second.
Okay, cool.
So the basis of it is that there's these guys that are tied up and they're facing, cave wall, and there's a fire in the background, and the only thing that they can see are these like silhouettes on the wall, or these figures.
Yeah.
One day, and they're the whole time they've been tied up the whole time.
Right.
One day, the one guy somehow gets out, or they let him loose or something, and he goes out and he sees what life is like from
Yep.
and he comes back and he tries to explain what's going on, and the guys don't believe him and they don't understand.
Yep.
So that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Exactly.
Like,
that's beautiful. I absolutely love that. Yeah, because so what they see is a one-dimensional shadow of the object, but what the person actually sees is every little intricate thing that makes up that shadow. And so that's the transformation from not knowing but thinking to actually knowing, or even to just being like at the bottom of that well, being like, well, at least I know I don't know. At least I know it's not those stupid shadows. Because I think that's a really great example of how the Dunning-Kruger effect works and how hard it is to convince people. And so, like I said, the thing I would take away from this episode is that you'll never get all of the knowledge, but you can at least remind yourself about the Dunning-Kruger effect. You can know that the Dunning-Kruger effect exists, and when you get into an argument with your spouse or with a neighbor, or if you're with a professor or your boss, you can step back and say, well, we're both experiencing this Dunning-Kruger effect thing, and you get an opportunity anyway.
Yeah, I think there's actually this book. I think it's called. I just read it. It's Real Magic by Dean Radin. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it.
He's awesome. Yeah,
he's got some cool philosophy stuff in there, and I mean the book's about psi work, but did you watch that movie I told you, by the way?
I haven't gotten to it yet. Like I've watched so many of the documentaries, but I'm sure I'll also learn. I don't know much about Pat Price. I'm definitely gonna have to get to it.
Yeah, it was I didn't know. I mean, I just knew the stuff that we've talked about and watching some of those videos on what those guys were doing and stuff, but
it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it should be I mean, it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, that's kind of in history now. So what's
I,
going on? You know,
that's,
like what's
that's
been progressed since then, and what, you know.
That's what I'm saying. It's kind of amazing. Like one of the points he makes in his, it may have been his TED talk that got banned, Russell Targ, or maybe it was another talk that he did. But he'll make this joke. He was like, in the 80s, you know, ESP existed. Like, you know, they talked about it on the news. There were you know, articles written
Well,
about
that's
it.
this movie. Half of the clips they show are interviews with like Ted Koppel and
Right.
like main
So
news people.
that's right. But then at some point, like in the 90s, when they disbanded the program in the government, like, you know, the government and the media all just decided to just pretend it just didn't never existed. And now it's not even in the popular conscious. You know, people really don't, you know, they've heard of psychics, but they've never heard of any of this stuff. But like you're saying, it's history. It's happened. It's already on paper. Like it's all there. Like the government uses psychics. The police use psychics. Wealthy people use psychics to you know.
That's what
like,
that Pat guy was. That guy was a sheriff or some sort of cop, and he was able to see crime scene stuff while he was doing the job. Like one of these, like yeah, and then he would use it to help him. So they started calling him in on all these different things to find things and do things.
And it's like, you know, even just hearing you describe it, like all the woo-woo alarms go off in your head, right? Like, oh, this guy can see crime scenes. But that, I mean, first of all, like just notice how Hollywood primes us to make that out to be something that's fictional by telling the story all the time, but in a sensationalized way.
They call it the laugh factor. I've seen this with both UFO stuff and the sci stuff is the laugh factor. So if you make something sound so ridiculous that it couldn't possibly, so this plays into the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's using this psychology to like affect what people do and don't do.
So it's amazing. Like, I mean, you know, I've come to the point now where I consider our education that we received as children to be nationalistic indoctrination, because it was never meant to make us learn, you know, how to learn. It's not learning how to learn. It's being taught particular facts. So we all have this nationalistic idea of what our country's history is. We have this national.
Learn this and you're done, you know?
Yeah. And so, and then the point is the more you do actual research, you find out that all of these even the fields of science are in some senses, in some fundamental senses, they have paradoxes that they're not. So it's just like, you know, it's just pretty shocking to me, like, you know, trying to get out of these.
I think it works its way all the way. Even the smartest people have cognitive bias. You can't get around. You can say that you don't have you don't use confirmation bias, or you don't use you do. Everybody does. I mean, even I've seen it on Kevin doesn't like this guy, but Brian Cox when he was on Joe Rogan, he's a theoretical or a quantum physicist and an astrophysicist. He, you know, the stuff that he says, it's like, dude, you don't have empirical evidence for that, but yet you're making it seem like you're going to these bishops and telling them how the world works and stuff. Well,
it's so
they have a philosophical view that I'm sure you couldn't even wrap your head around. So
again,
you know.
Right. No, and that's just another, it's a perfect little reminder, something I just wanted to just keep putting as little nuggets in the episode, is that unless you're a full-blown, complete, massive expert on a topic, what's even the point of expressing your opinion? And, you know, so yeah, when this physicist goes up to this, you know, clergy member and they have a conversation, I mean, what's really the point, right? Like you're saying, none of them are really able to have the conversation because they don't understand each other's points. They're just talking about each other. So it just shows that, like, if you really truly want to be engaged in learning, it takes a lot more effort and earnest, you know, engagement from yourself than to just get on stage and whatever. Yeah. So I find the hubris of like Neil deGrasse Tyson and all these people just so, you know, I remember once one of his things like, oh, let me tell you what happens when you die. And he starts describing how the body decomposes. And it's just like, how can you get on stage and television and say, let me tell you what happens when you die? That's anti-scientific.
Yeah.
Terrible.
No, I mean, that's just that's where we live. That's what it is. Everybody wants to be on TV. Everybody wants to be the voice of reason. Everybody wants to, hey, look at me, you know, and we live in an age now where it's accessible to everybody. So people do have the platform to, you know, shout platitudes from the highest mountaintop.
Yeah, if someone says believe me, you know that they're a fearful person or they're playing towards your fears. So it's just watch out. Don't believe anybody. Don't believe me. Look it up.
Yeah, we got to get to a point where it's all love and positivity, and instead of this like low frequency, this high, we got to get to that high frequency, you know.
I dig it. Yep. And again, it's about that worldview. So I hope hopefully this episode reaches some people, and they know the Dunning-Kruger effect exists, and they can say,
this episode will reach people, and I'll tell you why. because I'm gonna jam it down every motherfucker's throat
Yeah.
until they watch this shit. That's why this is gonna happen.
It's already been posted 15 times and we haven't even stopped.
Perfect. Yeah, again, because we didn't talk about anything particular. We just talked about something that we don't know, right? So it's just a nice little nugget, something to take with you, and
isn't that where you start though? Where we don't know. Let's not start from,
Let's not start at the peak and then
yeah,
jam down.
because some of those building blocks are a little faulty in my opinion. So
that's right. You have to start the first. The whole way knowledge works is you come across something that you realize you don't understand, and so that's that miracle of the Dunning-Kruger effect gets wiped away for a second. You say,
you got to build that pyramid.
I don't know what's going on here. Yeah. Yep, it's cool.
Sweet, dude. Well, thanks for coming on, and we'll definitely have you back on when you come up with your latest and greatest research. But this was awesome. I think it's a great topic, and I think it applies to this age of technology and this modern way of thinking. And there is some sort of little thing happening in society right now. So hopefully, it gets to the people, and people start making the right choices. So.
That's it.
Yeah, people are waking up, so it's a slow but sure thing.
I agree. Moved on.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. We'll catch you guys next time. We'll actually be back tomorrow night with our buddy Jack from the Trip Whip channel. So check you guys tomorrow. Peace.
Later.
See ya.